of 10 years in a secret, maximum security dungeon.
Right.
And the regime that locked you in the dark, the exact same regime that tortured your friends, they finally collapse.
Yeah.
You walk out into the daylight. What is your very first move?
Most people would run. Right.
Exactly. Or seek revenge. A violent grasp for political power, maybe. But today, we're looking at a man who emerged from a decade in the dark and decided the most radical thing he could possibly do was to hand out cows to single mothers.
It is wild.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack this.
It's honestly one of the most remarkable human pivots you can study. And to understand the magnitude of that pivot, we're doing a deep dive today into the life of Zegai Asfaw. We're drawing directly from extensive interviews and historical accounts of his life.
Because he was the unsung architect of one of the largest, most sweeping land reform programs in modern global history.
Right, Ethiopia's 1975 Land to the Tiller Proclamation.
And just so you, listening to this, know exactly what we're walking into today, the sources we are unpacking cover a period of intense, often violent upheaval in Ethiopia.
Extremely violent, yeah.
We are dealing with an absolute monarchy under Emperor Haile Selassie, followed by a Marxist military junta known as the Derg, and, various armed liberation fronts. The history here is incredibly polarized.
Oh, absolutely.
So our goal today isn't to play judge and jury or to endorse any specific political faction from these civil conflicts. We are just here to figure out how this one specific man navigated a terrifyingly volatile landscape.
Yeah, how he completely dismantled a centuries-old feudal system, survived the resulting chaos, and fundamentally transformed his own philosophy of power.
Precisely.
And you really cannot understand Zegai Asfaw, or the land reform he authored, without first understanding the ground he was born on.
Right, the literal ground.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, 20th century Ethiopia was defined by profound historical complexities regarding land, particularly in the south.
Because of Emperor Menelik II?
Yeah, right. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Menelik expanded his empire southward. And this wasn't just a political conquest. It was a fundamental alteration of the earth.
How so?
Well, the northern systems of land tenure, which were highly complex but generally kept land within communities, they were not applied in the south. Instead, massive tracts of southern land were confiscated.
Just taken outright.
Just taken and given to northern nobility, military officers, loyalists. So the indigenous populations living on that land suddenly woke up to find they were no longer owners.
They were tenants on their own ancestral soil.
Exactly.
So we're talking about the creation of an entire class of landless peasantry, practically overnight by historical standards.
Yeah.
And that brings us to Zegai's birth in 1942 in a rural village called Bukusami in the Wolmera district. This is an Oromo family. But what stands out to me in the sources is his family's specific position in this hierarchy. Because they weren't the landless peasants.
No, they weren't.
His father actually owned enough land to support the family, and they utilized tenants. They had sharecroppers.
Yes, and understanding the mechanics of that sharecropping system it's vital. Because it wasn't just paying rent.
Right.
A tenant farmer in this system was bound in a state of near servitude. The sources detail that these farmers were forced to surrender a third, and in some brutal cases, up to half of their total crop yield to the landlord.
Half your food, just gone.
Gone. But it didn't stop at the harvest. They also owed the landlord free forced labor.
Wow.
Yeah. If the landlord needed his house repaired, his fences mended, or, his personal fields plowed, the tenant had to drop their own work and provide that labor for free.
That economic math is just devastating. If you're a farmer and you lose a third of your crop immediately, plus you lose the actual hours in your week you need to tend to your own survival, how do you ever get ahead?
You don't. You are permanently trapped at the edge of starvation.
But here is where the story gets incredibly layered. Zegai's family is benefiting from this system, but his bloodline is a walking contradiction of the very empire that created the system.
That's one of the most fascinating details in the source text. His family tree embodies the paradox of modern Ethiopia.
Right.
On his father's side, his great-grandfather was a Aurari. That's a military commander and loyalist who actually rode with Emperor Menelik's invading army during that southern conquest.
The conquerors.
Exactly. But on his mother's side, his great-grandfather was a fierce Oromo liberation fighter who took up arms against Menelik's expansion.
I mean, talk about a complicated Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
Historically speaking, you have the conqueror and the conquered literally bound together in his DNA. And I wonder how much that dual lineage shaped him.
It had to be massive.
Yeah, when you grow up, knowing your blood represents both sides of a massive, bloody historical grievance, I imagine it either tears you apart or it forces you to develop an incredible capacity to see multiple sides of a conflict. You can't just demonize the other when the other is your grandfather.
It certainly gave him a visceral, grounded understanding of Ethiopia's complex ethnic dynamics. But his empathy was also forged by profound personal tragedy within his immediate family.
Yeah, the sources talk about his mother.
Right. His mother gave birth to 16 children over her lifetime.
16?
Only 4 survived.
I read that in the notes, and the sheer volume of that grief is just hard to process. The source mentions it was due to an undiagnosed rhesus-negative blood condition.
Yeah.
What exactly was happening there medically? Because back in rural Ethiopia in the 1940s, they wouldn't have had a name for this.
Right. They just experienced it as a devastating curse. Biologically, Rh incompatibility occurs when a mother has Rh negative blood, but her fetus inherits Rh positive blood from the father. During the first pregnancy, it's usually fine. But during childbirth, the mother's immune system is exposed to the baby's Rh positive blood cells.
Oh, I see.
So her body treats those cells as a foreign invader and starts building antibodies against them. So in every subsequent pregnancy with an Rh positive baby, the mother's own immune system aggressively attacks the fetus's red blood cells.
Oh, wow.
Today, a simple injection prevents this. But back then, it meant a woman would carry child after child to term, only to watch them perish shortly after birth.
That is heartbreaking. And it explains why Zi was so deeply enmeshed with the rural community around him. His mother was enduring this relentless cycle of loss, and who was helping her?
The tenants.
Right, who was keeping the household running, who fought alongside his father when the Italians invaded in 1936? It was the sharecropper.
Exactly. They were not abstract economic units on a ledger to him. They were the fabric of his childhood, which makes his next life transition so jarring.
Okay, what happens next?
His father originally wanted him to take a traditional route. He wanted him to join the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and become a deacon.
Which was a very stable path.
Yes, very respected. But an older cousin named Shibru intervened. Shibru lived in Addis Ababa, the capital, and he believed Zigai needed a modern, secular education.
So Shibru basically pulls him out of the village and brings him to the city. But Shibru's teaching methods were, well, let's call them intense.
Extremely intense.
The sources describe Shibru rigorously tutoring Zegai before he even entered school. There's a specific memory Zegai shares about struggling to differentiate between the lowercase English letters B and D.
Yeah, a classic childhood struggle.
Right, but Shibru's response wasn't flashcards, it was physical punishment. He would hit him for getting it wrong.
It was a brutal introduction to academia. It was driven by a desperate belief that education was the only way to survive in the changing world. But the harshness didn't stop with Shibru. When Zegai finally entered the formal school system in Addis Ababa, he faced intense social alienation. He arrived with a heavy, distinct Oromo accent. And in a school environment heavily dominated by Amharic-speaking students and Amharic culture, he was instantly ostracized.
The classic outsider dynamic. Kids are cruel everywhere, but here it had a heavy ethnic and class overtone.
Absolutely.
They mocked him, called him derogatory names, basically labeling him a backward country boy. And his reaction is really telling. He doesn't fight them.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't try to become the class clown to win them over. He just shuts down completely. He becomes the quietest kid in the room. He refuses to speak because he knows the moment he opens his mouth, his accent will invite ridicule.
He weaponized silence as a defense mechanism, but internally he was absorbing everything. He was a brilliant student, consistently getting top marks. He was building a massive internal reservoir of knowledge. Eventually, that intellect earns him a highly coveted scholarship to study medicine in Yugoslavia.
Okay, so here is the golden ticket. He's going to escape the bullying, escape Ethiopia, become a doctor in Europe.
Yeah.
But literally the day before he is supposed to get on the airplane, the bureaucracy crushes him. A government official is reviewing his transcripts and notices a technicality.
A tiny technicality.
Right. Zegai had taken general science courses, but he hadn't taken a specific course in pure chemistry. And just like that, the official cancels the scholarship the day before the flight.
It's a devastating blow. The sources note he wept openly. But the immediate crisis wasn't just losing the scholarship. It was what awaited him if he stayed.
The draft.
Exactly. The government was aggressively recruiting, often essentially drafting bright young men into the newly established military academy in Harar. Zegai had absolutely no desire to become a soldier. He needed to hide in plain sight.
And this is where we see that quiet, observant kid use his intellect to manipulate the system. How exactly did he dodge the military draft? Because he couldn't just stay home.
He used a structural loophole. During his schooling, he had sat for the London matriculation exams.
Okay.
These were standardized British exams that many Commonwealth and associated nations used to gauge university readiness. Because he had stellar grades on these external British exams, he managed to bypass the normal Ethiopian university registration process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he quietly slipped into the science faculty at Haile Selassie University without drawing attention to himself.
He practically ghosted his way into college.
He did.
But science wasn't his forte. The source text has this darkly funny detail where his physics professor hands back an exam, and the professor has literally drawn a little stick figure with RIP written next to it on Zegai's paper.
Yeah, rough grade.
His physics grade was dead on arrival. So he pivots to the arts faculty, and eventually he finds his way into the law school.
And law school is the crucible that changes everything.
Right.
Because up until this point, Zegai's survival strategy has been silence. Be quiet, get good grades, don't draw attention. But jurisprudence fundamentally requires argument.
You can't be a silent lawyer.
Exactly. You cannot be a silent lawyer. Law school forced him to realize that the law is an active arena. If you want to defend yourself or others, you have to find your voice and you have to fight.
Which sets the stage for a massive collision with the imperial government in 1966.
Oh, yes.
Zegai is a law student. The university campus is a hotbed of political activism. There's a major student demonstration, and the emperor's police forcefully crack down, arresting 7 university students and locking them away. Now, normally under an absolute monarchy, if the emperor's police lock you up, you just stay locked up until they feel like letting you go.
Right.
But Zegai and his friend, a fellow law student named Duby Work, decide to do something completely unprecedented.
They filed a writ of habeas corpus.
Let's break that down for you because it's a term we hear in legal dramas,
Yeah.
but the actual mechanics of it are crucial here. What is habeas corpus, and why was it so radical to use it in 1960s Ethiopia?
Well, habeas corpus is Latin for "you shall have the body." It is a fundamental legal principle dating back centuries. It states that a person cannot be kept in prison indefinitely without being brought before a judge or a court to determine if their detention is actually lawful.
So it forces the police to prove they have a reason.
Exactly. It prevents secret, indefinite arrests by the executive branch.
Oh.
Now, Ethiopia had recently adopted a modern written constitution and a penal code that included the principle of habeas corpus.
Right.
The emperor wanted to project the image of a modern constitutional state to the international community. But internally, the police still operated with total impunity. No one had ever successfully leveraged this written law against the imperial police force.
It's brilliant. I like to think of it like finding a structural vulnerability in a fortress or a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
They use the emperor's own legal system to defeat the emperor's police. Zegai and a baby take the emperor's own rule book and use it to corner them, but they run into an immediate procedural wall.
They do.
They march into the high court to file this, but they are just students. They aren't licensed attorneys.
Right. The judge initially dismisses them, stating they have no legal standing to represent the detained students.
Which makes sense legally.
It does. But they were prepared for this. They had quietly enlisted a brilliant, fully licensed, and very brave lawyer named Gedehun Huningya.
Okay.
Gedehun steps forward in the courtroom, officially takes up the petition, and reads the plea into the record. Suddenly, the court is forced to act. The judge summons the police.
I can only imagine the panic in the police precinct. They are used to absolute authority, and suddenly a judge is demanding they justify an arrest.
Yeah, it was unheard of.
So the police show up to court. And what is their defense? Do they have actual charges?
Not at all. Their defense is essentially bureaucratic stalling. They stand before the judge and claim that because the student protests are so chaotic and widespread, the police force is simply too busy to formulate official charges against these 7 specific individuals.
Too busy.
Yeah, they ask the court for an indefinite extension of time.
And this is the make-or-break moment for the rule of law. The judge presiding over this is Justice Ngozi Fight-Howick. He's looking at the emperor's police on one side and these young law students on the other. And he does something incredibly courageous.
He really does.
He actually upholds the text of the Constitution. He looks at the police and says, the law clearly states you have 48 hours to bring formal charges. You have failed to do so. He stripes his gavel and orders the immediate release of all 7 students.
The psychological earthquake of that moment for Zigai cannot be overstated. He had spent his childhood watching landlords exploit tenants with impunity. He had been bullied into silence.
Yeah.
But walking out of that courtroom, he had tangible proof that the law was not just a theoretical framework or a tool of oppression. It could be a weapon, a very precise surgical weapon for social change.
But here is where I'm struggling to understand his calculus. Because we established that Zigai's family had land.
They did.
The sources even mention that Zigai personally had sheep and goats registered in his own name back in the village. He's at a prestigious law school. He could easily put his head down, graduate, join a corporate firm in Addis Ababa, and live a very comfortable, wealthy life.
Sure.
Why on earth would a guy with sheep in his name poke the bear by suing the emperor's police force? It doesn't make logical sense from a self-preservation standpoint.
It doesn't make sense if you view him solely as an economic actor. But you have to go back to that visceral connection to the tenants. He couldn't reconcile his own relative comfort with the systemic exploitation he witnessed every time he went home.
I see.
There is a deeply revealing anecdote in the sources about his teenage years. The imperial government instituted a new agricultural income tax. But the landlords, instead of paying it out of their profits, colluded to pass the entire tax burden down onto the sharecroppers.
So the people already losing a third of their crop are now paying the landlord's taxes too.
Exactly. And young Zigai, long before law school, went out into the fields and actively agitated the tenants. He told them, this is illegal. Do not pay this tax. It is the landlord's responsibility.
Wow, even as a teenager.
Yeah, he stirred up so much trouble that neighboring landlords actually came to his father to complain about his son radicalizing the workforce. So his moral compass was already permanently locked onto the injustice of the land system.
So the habeas corpus victory just gave him the blueprint for how to fight the system effectively.
Exactly.
That victory directly informed his decision upon graduating in 1969. He rejected the lucrative private practice route and instead joined the government, specifically the Ministry of Land Reform.
Which brings us to a wildly frustrating chapter of his life.
Oh, yes. We're entering the early 1970s. Zigai takes all this idealistic student activist energy and walked straight into the glacial, suffocating reality of bureaucratic reform under a rigid monarchy.
It's quite a shift.
He joins the Ministry of Land Reform and works under a minister named Bele Abebe. And Bele Abebe sounds like a masterful political tactician.
He was a highly sophisticated operator. Bele Abebe was educated at the London School of Economics and Harvard. He understood the deeply conservative nature of the emperor's parliament.
Right, he wasn't naive.
No. He knew that if he walked in and proposed land to the tiller, meaning confiscating all land from the nobility and giving it to the peasants, the parliament would laugh him out of the room, or worse, have him arrested for treason.
Yeah.
So Bele Abebe and his team, including Zigai, devised a strategy of incrementalism. They drafted a relatively moderate landlord-tenant relationship bill.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of this moderate bill. What exactly were they proposing if they weren't taking the land away?
The bill sought to heavily regulate the existing system rather than destroy it. First, it aimed to cap the sharecropping extraction, ensuring landlords couldn't demand exorbitant percentages of the harvest.
Okay, that's a good start.
Second, it proposed strict protections against arbitrary eviction. A landlord couldn't just throw a family off the land because they felt like it. And third, it sought to legally abolish the demand for unpaid personal servitude.
Meaning the tenants' time was their own, not the landlord's to command for household chores.
Exactly.
By modern standards, that sounds like basic human rights.
Absolutely.
It's a compromise. They are letting the nobility keep the actual ownership of the earth. But when they introduce this bill to the parliament, the reaction is completely unhinged.
Unhinged is the right word.
They have 0% support initially. The sources note that deputies were standing up in Parliament claiming this moderate regulation was tantamount to slavery for the farmers.
Which is rich.
Right, considering the farmers were already basically indentured. Other deputies claimed it would destroy the amicable traditional relationship between landlords and tenants. It was pure aristocratic panic. So how do Zigai and Bele Abebe fight back? Because they can't just mandate it.
They engineered a brilliant, multi-pronged lobbying campaign. First, they used the physical space of the parliament.
What do you mean?
They organized peasant farmers from the countryside to travel to Addis Ababa and sit up in the gallery of the Parliament building during the debates.
Oh, wow. That is such a powerful image. The wealthy deputies are down on the floor making grandiose speeches about how the peasants love the current system, and they literally have to look up into the gallery and see the exhausted, weather-beaten faces of the actual peasants staring down at them.
Yeah,
It's psychological pressure.
it absolutely was. Meanwhile, Balea was working the floor. He meticulously lobbied the deputies individually. He countered the false narratives, explained the economic benefits of a stable agricultural workforce, and slowly, painstakingly built a coalition.
And against all odds, they achieved what seemed impossible. They pushed that initial 0% support all the way up to an 84% approval rating in the lower House of Deputies.
An 84% supermajority for a bill that started with zero support is a masterclass in bureaucratic maneuvering.
But the House of Deputies was only half the battle. Because in this bicameral system, the bill has to go to the Senate, and the Senate is not made up of elected officials. The Senate is the highest echelon of the nobility.
Correct. The Senate represented the massive landowners, the royal family, the highest military commanders. And here is where Emperor Haile Selassie makes a catastrophic, fatal miscalculation.
Right.
The highest nobility, specifically figures like Princess Tenanyawork and Ras Mesfin, who held staggering tracts of land across the South, viewed even this moderate regulation as a communist infiltration.
They saw it as the thin edge of the wedge.
Exactly. If they conceded regulation today, confiscation would come tomorrow.
So they decide to flex their absolute power. They summon Minister Balea to the royal palace, and it is not a polite meeting.
No, it wasn't.
The sources say the princess openly insulted him in front of the emperor. They accuse the ministry of trying to destroy the empire, and the emperor, siding with his nobility, simply kills the bill. He shelves it indefinitely.
Just like that.
All that work, the 84% approval, the peasant mobilization, erased by royal decree.
It was a crushing defeat for the reformers. But let's pause and analyze the nobility's paranoia. Because as much as it seems reactionary from the strict perspective of aristocratic self-preservation, the emperor was actually right to be terrified of Balaeve's ministry.
Yes, because in the interview, Zegai openly admits that the moderate bill was a Trojan horse.
He does.
He confesses that the young radicals in the ministry, the lawyers, the sociologists, the economists, they had a secret secondary agenda. Their plan was that once the bill passed, they would hire hundreds of young, educated university graduates and send them out into the deep rural countryside as tenancy officers to enforce the new law.
And the real goal of those tenancy officers wasn't just to check paperwork. Their mandate, as quietly envisioned by the radicals in the ministry, was to use their government authority to gather the peasants, educate them about their historical exploitation, and actively radicalize them against the nobility.
Wow.
Yeah, the Ministry of Land Reform had essentially become a state-funded incubator for revolution, operating right under the emperor's nose.
It's incredible. The emperor was paying the salaries of the people plotting to dismantle his empire. But by killing the moderate bill, the emperor sealed his own fate.
Exactly. This is the tragic paradox of rigid power structures. By crushing the moderate bureaucratic path to reform, by refusing to allow even a tiny release valve for the immense pressure building in the countryside, the nobility eliminated the possibility of a peaceful transition.
They made a radical, violent revolution the only remaining option.
Yes. The system refused to bend, so it was destined to shatter.
And it shatters spectacularly. By early 1974, the pressure cooker explodes. There are mutinies in the military, widespread protests, and a crippling famine that the government tries to hide. The imperial government begins to collapse. But just before the military officially deposes the emperor, Zegai actually quits his government job in utter despair. He feels the bureaucratic route is dead.
Yeah, he's just done.
He joins a private law firm run by his old friend, Justice Negassi Feithoek. That's the very judge who granted his habeas corpus petition years ago. Zegai is finally making good money in private practice, but he is absolutely miserable.
He was trapped in a state of agonizing cognitive dissonance. The firm primarily handled labor disputes. So here is Zegai, the man who agitated tenants to refuse taxes, the man who tried to legally dismantle feudalism, now standing in a labor court, using his brilliant legal mind to defend wealthy factory owners and business tycoons against unrepresented, exploited laborers.
Oh man, that's brutal.
Every day he went to work, He was actively defending the exact class of people he despised, using his education to reinforce the inequality he had sworn to destroy.
I really think that brief, miserable period in private practice was the crucible he needed. If he hadn't experienced the sheer soul-crushing agony of defending the rich against the poor, he might have become complacent.
That's a great point.
He might have just rationalized it as, doing his job. But because he hated it so viscerally, he was primed and ready when the knock at his door finally came.
And that knock changed world history. It's late 1974. The military junta, known as the Derg, has taken full control of the country. Emperor Haile Selassie is deposed.
Right.
But the military officers are not economists. They are soldiers. They know they need to solve the land issue because it's the root of all the country's instability, but they don't know how. So a military officer tracks Zegai down at his private law firm. They bring him in and basically confess that the newly reconstituted Ministry of Land Reform is paralyzed. The bureaucrats are arguing in circles about progressive taxation models or setting arbitrary limits on how much land someone can own.
Right.
The military tells Zegai, we don't want half measures. We want a permanent solution to end the feudal regime forever. Give us your frank opinion. And Zegai looks at these heavily armed soldiers who just overthrew a 3,000-year-old monarchy, and he says, why don't you go for land to the tiller? Land to the tiller is the absolute nuclear option in the realm of agrarian reform. It means the complete uncompensated confiscation of all privately held land and the immediate redistribution of that land directly to the people who physically work it.
Yeah.
The military officers were intrigued but cautious. They asked Zegai a very practical question. If we decree this, can the peasants actually defend these new rights against the furious armed landlords?
Because the landlords aren't just going to hand over the keys. They have militias. They have weapons.
Precisely. But Zegai, remembering his youth, remembering the tenants who fought the Italians, assures the Derg. He tells them that if the government provides the legal backing, the peasants will use their spears, their axes, and their sheer numbers to defend their land.
Wow.
The military agrees. And practically overnight, the miserable private practice lawyer is appointed as the Minister of Land Reform for the revolutionary government.
The speed of this transition is breathtaking. A bureaucratic effort that was stalled for a decade transforms into one of the most sweeping, radical land confiscations in global history.
It's incredibly fast.
Zegai gathers a small, highly trusted team of radical intellectuals, and they lock themselves away to secretly draft the legislation.
The secrecy was paramount. If the aristocratic class, or even moderate factions within the new government, caught wind of the specific details of the proclamation, they would have mobilized immense resistance, perhaps even a counter-coup.
Right.
Zegai didn't even brief the other civilian cabinet ministers on the full scope of the draft. It was a closely guarded state secret.
But in the middle of this cloak and dagger drafting process, Zegai does something incredibly human. He leaves the secret drafting room, and he goes to visit his mother.
Yeah.
His family, remember, are landowners. He sits his mother down and says, Mom, you need to know something. Next month, you are going to lose all your land. She looks at him and asks, who is taking it? Is it the boys who have been helping me farm it, meaning the tenants? When Zegai says yes, her response is just staggering. She doesn't yell. She doesn't call him a traitor to the family. She looks at her son, the minister, and says, God bless you.
That anecdote is a profound distillation of the historical moment. Even as a landowner who was about to be economically ruined by your own son's pen, she understood the deeper moral arc of the universe.
Yeah.
She knew that for the Oromo people and for the oppressed peasants across the South, this wasn't theft. It was the reinstatement of historical justice. It was returning what had been stolen generations ago.
So early 1975, the proclamation drops. The earth literally shifts beneath Ethiopia. The law limits land holdings to a maximum of 10 hectares per family. That's about 25 acres. You cannot hire labor to work your land. You must work it yourself.
Right.
But here is the massive logistical problem. You just outlawed feudalism on paper. But Ethiopia is vast, incredibly mountainous, with terrible infrastructure. How does a small group of drafters in the capital actually enforce this across thousands of miles of rural terrain? They can't use the old imperial bureaucracy because the bureaucrats hate the law.
This is where Zegai and the Derg unleash an administrative miracle, which also became a massive sociological experiment. They initiated the Zemeka campaign.
What was that?
They essentially closed the National University and the high schools, mobilizing over 60,000 students and teachers. These young, fired-up urban youths were deployed deep into the rural countryside.
I want to pause and just visualize the sheer logistical insanity of this. You are taking 60,000 urban teenagers and college students, many of whom have never left the city, and dropping them into remote villages. How do you feed them? How do they communicate when there are over 80 different ethnic groups and languages in Ethiopia?
It was chaotic, terrifying, and deeply inspiring all at once. The logistics were largely improvisational. The students often lived with the peasants, ate what they ate, and relied on local translators.
Wow.
Their mandate was revolutionary. They were there to explain the new law to the illiterate farmers, to physically help them demarcate the 10-hectare plots, and crucially, to organize the farmers into peasant associations.
Oh, I see.
Over 25,000 of these associations were formed. These local committees essentially became the new local governments, empowered to adjudicate land disputes, organize communal labor, and defend the revolution against angry landlords.
And the landlords were furious. There were violent clashes, but the sheer volume of the students, backed by the implicit threat of the military, overwhelmed the old guard.
Yeah.
Shortly after, urban land and extra housing were also nationalized, completely vaporizing the economic foundation of the aristocracy in a matter of months. But while Zegai is experiencing the triumph of his life's work, the environment around him is rapidly deteriorating into a nightmare.
Yes, we are entering the era of the Red Terror. The Derg, the military junta that empowered Zegai, was not a monolith.
Right.
It was fracturing. And a ruthless faction led by Mengistu Haile Mariam was consolidating absolute power through extreme violence.
Yeah.
The regime became intensely paranoid, turning its guns not just on the old aristocracy, but on competing Marxist groups, student activists, and eventually its own government officials.
Zegai is walking a terrifying tightrope. He is moved from Minister of Land Reform to Minister of Agriculture and eventually to Minister of Justice. He is a high-ranking official in a government that is actively executing its own citizens in the streets. How did he survive day to day? The sources mention he was constantly trying to mitigate the violence from the inside.
It was a horrific balancing act. He was using his bureaucratic power to save lives where he could.
So.
He would quietly issue passports to targeted individuals, essentially smuggling them out of the country before the death squads could find them. He used his authority as Minister of Justice to halt vindictive, bogus lawsuits filed by former landlords trying to punish the peasants.
That's incredibly brave.
It is, but the psychological toll must have been unbearable. He was attending cabinet meetings with men who were ordering the executions of his former university colleagues and the very students who helped implement his land reform.
And he wasn't doing himself any favors with the Derg leadership because he was actively trying to subvert their total control through legal semantics.
Oh, this is a crucial point.
Yeah. When he drafted the original Land to the Tiller proclamation, the Derg wanted the law to state that all land was now government property. But Zegai refused. He wrote that all rural land was public property.
Right.
That seems like a tiny difference in translation, but the Derg investigators hauled him in and interrogated him furiously over it. Why were they so angry about the word public?
Because in the realm of constitutional law, the distinction between government and public is the distinction between totalitarianism and democracy. If the land is government property, then the military junta simply replaces the emperor as the ultimate unchallengeable landlord. They can lease it, seize it, or use it to coerce the population. But by defining it as public property, Zegai was legally vesting the ultimate ownership of the nation's primary resource in the hands of the people themselves.
He was trying to build a legal firewall.
Exactly, to prevent the Derg from entirely hijacking the revolution. It was a semantic rebellion that almost resulted in his immediate execution.
Which brings up a very difficult moral question. I want to pose this to you and to the listener. How does someone justify collaborating with a violently oppressive regime? Is the trade-off worth it? Does the total eradication of centuries of feudalism justify working alongside a junta that is committing atrocities?
It is the defining moral dilemma of Zegai's life. And he addresses it with remarkable nuance in his interviews. He does not offer a blanket rationalization.
Right.
He explicitly and forcefully condemns the Derg's human rights record as brutal, ugly, and indefensible. Yet, he simultaneously defends the socioeconomic transformations they enacted, specifically the land reform, as absolutely necessary and historically justified.
Compartmentalized it.
Yes. He chose to view history in compartments. He recognized a hard, ugly truth. The civilian progressive movement, the students, the intellectuals, they possessed the moral high ground, but they completely lacked the sheer physical force required to break the entrenched power of the aristocracy.
The military possessed that force.
Exactly. Zegai made the agonizing decision to leverage the military's monopoly on violence to achieve the structural change the country desperately needed, fully aware that the monster he was riding would likely eventually turn on him.
And eventually it does. The momentum of the Red Terror is just too massive. Zegai's popularity with the peasants, his semantic subversions in the law, and crucially, his ethnic background as a prominent Oromo intellectual make him deeply suspect to Mengistu's inner circle.
Yeah.
In 1979, the knock at his door comes again. But this time, it's not a military officer asking him to join the cabinet. It's the security forces coming to arrest him.
This initiates the darkest chapter of his life, his decade in the dark. He is taken from the heights of ministerial power and vanished into Maekelawi, an infamous maximum security political prison.
And the pretext for his arrest is incredibly flimsy, like almost laughable if it weren't so tragic.
What was it again?
The government intercepted an undelivered letter written by an official of the Oromo Liberation Front. The letter was intended for Zegai and several others, seeking their support. Because this undelivered piece of paper existed, Zegai was accused of high treason.
Wow.
He is locked in this black site for 10 years, a full decade. And in a sickening twist of historical irony, the man who filed Ethiopia's very first habeas corpus case to outlaw indefinite, uncharged detention is now held for 10 years without ever being formally charged, without ever seeing a courtroom, without ever facing a judge.
It's incredibly tragic.
The conditions inside Maekelawi were horrific. It was designed to break humans. His close friend and fellow prisoner, Demisi Daba, was tortured so severely during interrogations that his body was permanently distorted.
The physical brutality was rampant, but amidst this nightmare, there is a bizarre, deeply revealing anomaly regarding Zegai's treatment.
Oh, the order from Mengistu.
Right. Mengistu Haile Mariam, the ruthless dictator leading the Derg, issued a specific, explicit order to the prison guards. They could interrogate Zegai, they could subject him to psychological pressure, they could lock him in isolation, but they were absolutely forbidden from physically torturing him. They could not lay a hand on him.
Why? Mengistu was not known for his mercy. Why spare this one specific minister from the physical violence everyone else was enduring?
The sources, corroborated by accounts from his fellow inmates, suggest it came down to the sheer force of Zegai's character. He projected an aura of absolute honesty and unyielding integrity that unsettled even his captors.
Really?
Yeah, he was widely known, even among the Derg leadership, as a man who simply did not lie. During his interrogations, the security officials demanded he sign a fabricated confession, admitting he was a clandestine member of the OLF.
And what did he say?
Zegai looked his interrogators in the eye and delivered a stunning response. He said, "Don't bother torturing me. I would prefer to die for the Oromo cause. I will sign your paper, but if you ask me another question after this, I won't know the answer. I am determined it is better to die than to be tortured."
That is incredible. He's basically saying, I will not let you strip my dignity through pain. I'll give you your fake piece of paper, but you will never break my mind.
Exactly.
That absolute, unyielding stance paralyzed the investigators. They realized that physical pain wouldn't extract the complex web of lies they needed for a show trial.
So, denied the tool of physical torture, the regime subjected him to the slow, agonizing psychological warfare of indefinite confinement. Sensory deprivation, isolation, the constant grinding uncertainty of never knowing if today is the day you get executed.
Yeah.
The true threat in Maekelawi wasn't just the guards, it was the slow erosion of the self. Zegai understood profoundly that a mind left unoccupied in the dark will eventually collapse in on itself.
Right. If you have no input, your brain starts attacking you. So Zegai decides to fight back, not with violence, but by building a micro-society inside the prison. His friends start calling him the paterfamilias, the father figure of the cell blocks.
He innovated brilliant survival mechanisms. He understood that maintaining a connection to the cycles of life was vital for mental health. So he painstakingly negotiated with the prison administration, leveraging the respect he commanded to allow the prisoners a tiny patch of dirt in the compound.
A garden?
Yes, they started a garden. They grew tomatoes and cabbages. It wasn't just about nutrition. It was about nurturing life in a place designed for death.
He essentially creates a societal nervous system in a place built for sensory deprivation. When relatives are finally allowed to drop off books, he organizes a clandestine school within the prison walls. He's teaching inmates European languages, Spanish, Arabic. But my absolute favorite detail, the one that shows pure genius, is how they entertain themselves. They had zero recreation materials. So they decided to play chess. But they had no pieces. They had to manufacture a chess set out of actual garbage.
The ingenuity is astonishing.
Yeah.
To create the white pieces, they collected discarded orange peels, dried them out, and carved them into knights and rooks.
And the black pieces.
For the black pieces, they took dead batteries, cracked them open, extracted the black carbon cores, crushed that carbon into a fine powder, mixed it with a little water or spit to create a paste, and sculpted the black pieces.
That is just brilliant. But his leadership wasn't just about arts and crafts. It was about life and death decisions. At one point, the conditions become so intolerable that a group of inmates decides to launch a hunger strike to protest their indefinite detention. Now, in the history of political resistance, a hunger strike is considered the ultimate noble act of defiance. You use your own suffering to shame your captors. But Zegai does the opposite of what you'd expect. He actively intervenes and talks the men out of striking. He stops the protest. Why?
Because Zegai was a supreme pragmatist who deeply understood the psychology of the enemy. He gathered the striking prisoners and explained a terrifying reality. He told them, if the Derg finds someone on strike, someone who refuses to eat, they will rejoice. They will say, please send him to us. If you want to die, we will gladly give you a fast death.
Oh, wow.
Zegai realized that a hunger strike is only an effective weapon if your captor possesses a moral conscience or if they fear a public backlash. The Derg had neither. They were executing thousands in secret.
So it wouldn't be a victory.
No, to starve yourself to death wouldn't be a victory. It would simply be doing the regime's execution work for them, saving them a bullet. Zegai's philosophy was that under a totalitarian regime, survival itself is the ultimate act of defiance.
But the cost of that survival was overwhelmingly borne by his family on the outside. We have to talk about his wife, Tehe. While Zegai is surviving the prison, she is navigating an equally terrifying reality in Addis Ababa.
It was incredibly difficult for her.
She was left alone to raise 3 very young children on a severely reduced pension of just 600 birr a month.
And the financial devastation was compounded by complete social isolation. Because Zegai was branded an anti-revolutionary traitor by the state, his family became radioactive.
Yeah.
Former friends crossed the street to avoid them. Neighbors shunned them out of fear that associating with the wife of a political prisoner would bring the secret police to their own doors. The psychological burden on Sehe was immense.
And the impact on his children is just gut-wrenching. The regime kept him in complete isolation for years. When they finally relented and allowed him a brief family visit after 6 years in the dark, his eldest son, who was just a toddler when Zegai was arrested, was now nearly 10 years old.
Oh, that's rough.
The children walked into the visiting room, looked at this frail, aged man standing before them, and they didn't even recognize him. They had to turn to their mother and ask if this stranger was actually their father.
It is the profound tragedy of his life. He sacrificed his family life, his freedom, and a decade of his prime, all for a political cause that ultimately devoured him.
Yeah.
But history is never static. By 1989, the geopolitical tectonic plates were shifting massively. The Soviet Union, the Derg's primary patron, was collapsing. Internally, the Derg's military was suffering catastrophic defeats at the hands of various armed liberation fronts. The economy was in ruins.
Everything was falling apart.
Exactly. In a desperate, flailing attempt to salvage his public image and appease international pressure, Mengistu declared a general amnesty for political prisoners. Zegai Asfaw, after 10 years, was finally released.
He walks out. He is approaching 50. He has lost a decade. Most people in that scenario would flee the country immediately, seek asylum in Europe, write a memoir, and never look back. But as the Derg regime completely collapses in 1991, Zegai doesn't run. He is thrust right back into the fire of a newly transforming Ethiopia.
The transition from political prisoner back to political actor is swift. In 1991, a transitional government is formed by the victorious rebel coalitions. Given his massive historical credibility and his standing within the Oromo community, Zegai is brought back into the fold.
Right.
He briefly serves as Minister of Agriculture again, this time representing the Oromo Liberation Front in the coalition.
But the honeymoon doesn't last. The political factions in the transitional government quickly turn on each other. The OLF withdraws from the coalition, armed conflict threatens to resume, and Zegai, finding himself on the wrong side of the ruling power once again, is forced into a brief period of exile in the UK and the United States.
Which he hated.
Yeah, he absolutely despises exile. He feels useless sitting in a foreign country while his people are struggling. He maneuvers his way back to Ethiopia by 1993. And this time, he makes the final, most profound pivot of his life.
He turns his back entirely on the mechanics of top-down state power. He had spent his youth trying to rewrite the laws of the empire. He had spent his 30s wielding the absolute power of a revolutionary state. But having seen that state power morph into a totalitarian nightmare that swallowed him whole, he underwent a fundamental evolution in his philosophy of change. He gathered a few close friends, pooled together a minuscule donation of just 10,000 birr, which is practically nothing in the realm of international development, and founded a local non-governmental organization.
He calls the NGO Handi. And the translation of that word is so poetic and telling. In Afayan Oromo, Handi translates to the root of the tree.
That name is his new manifesto. In 1975, he believed change came from the canopy, from the sweeping edicts of government ministers raining down on the population.
Right.
By 1993, he realized that true, sustainable, unshakable power is horizontal. It doesn't come from the state. It grows from the roots. It is located in the community.
So taking that literally, Handi's very first project is a simple tree nursery. They use that 10,000 baht to buy seeds. They grow eucalyptus trees, which are fast-growing, and provide crucial timber for farmers to use as scaffolding and building materials, reducing the pressure to cut down older forests.
Yeah.
They also plant indigenous trees to rehabilitate lands devastated by years of war and mismanagement. But Zegai is an economist and a lawyer at heart. He knows that just planting trees isn't going to break the systemic cycle of rural poverty.
Right. Environmental rehabilitation had to be paired with economic architecture.
Oh.
So Handi expanded rapidly into microfinance, but specifically tailored to the rhythms of rural life. They established over 130 farmer cooperatives.
Oh, wow.
They built large storage facilities, which is a massive intervention. Normally, farmers are forced to sell their grain immediately after harvest when the market is flooded and prices are at rock bottom, just to pay off their debts.
Oh, I see.
By providing secure storage and revolving loans, farmers could hold on to their grain and sell it months later when prices were higher.
They are essentially breaking the monopoly of the predatory middlemen. But the initiative that absolutely blows my mind, the one that shows his sheer brilliance for structural design, is the Dabari program.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Dabari translates to Passover of cattle. Zegai was analyzing the rural demographics and realized that the absolute most marginalized, economically vulnerable people in the villages were women who were heading households alone, widows, divorcees.
Exactly.
But instead of importing some shiny, top-down Western NGO model to help them, he went looking for the answer in the past.
He practiced deep listening. He sought out an elder Oromo woman and asked her, before the modern state, before the NGOs, how did our community traditionally support the poorest among us?
Then what did she say?
She explained an ancient cultural practice where wealthy individuals with large herds would temporarily loan a milking cow to a poorer neighbor, sharing the wealth without stripping the dignity of the recipient. Zegai took that traditional concept and modernized it into an economic engine.
Let's walk through the math of the Dabari program, because it is an exponential wealth generation model. Handi goes out and purchases a high-quality, healthy heifer. They give this cow to a woman-headed household. Immediately, her family's nutrition improves because they have milk. She can sell the surplus milk or butter for cash to buy school supplies or medicine. It's a great intervention. But here is the genius mechanism. The cow is a gift, but it comes with a strict contractual obligation.
Right.
When that cow eventually gives birth to its first female calf, the woman does not keep it. She is obligated to pass that first female calf on to another pre-selected woman-headed household in her village.
It is a self-replicating asset. He engineered a cascading, horizontal network of wealth. By passing the calf, the first woman transitions from being a passive recipient of charity to becoming an active donor and a pillar of her community.
That's incredible.
It strips away the humiliation of dependency. It builds an intricate web of solidarity, mutual reliance, and economic resilience among the women in the village.
But providing an asset is only half the battle if the legal structure still oppresses you. And Zegai, the eternal lawyer, knew that true empowerment required structural legal protection. So he turns his attention back to the law, specifically women's land rights. Because even after his massive 1975 land reform, the system had a fatal patriarchal flaw.
Yes. While the 1975 law gave land to the peasant families, the actual tax receipts, which served as the de facto proof of land use rights, were invariably issued solely in the name of the male head of the household.
Oh, man.
This meant that if a marriage dissolved through divorce, or if the husband simply decided to kick his wife out, the man retained full legal control of the land. The woman, despite having worked the soil for decades, was left utterly destitute with no legal recourse.
So Zegai goes to war against the bureaucracy again. He lobbies fiercely, utilizing all his old legal acumen to mandate a change in the documentation. He fights to ensure that government land certificates bear the names and photographs of both the husband and the wife.
Joint ownership.
Exactly. It sounds like a simple administrative tweak, but it completely shifted the power dynamic inside millions of households, guaranteeing that women could not be casually cast out of their livelihoods.
And he didn't stop at property law. He utilized Hundi to tackle deeply entrenched, harmful traditional practices that oppressed women. Two primary targets were female genital mutilation and the practice of widow inheritance.
Widow inheritance being the practice where if a woman's husband dies, she is essentially treated as property and forced to marry his brother, regardless of her wishes.
Exactly. Now, a typical government approach to these issues is simply to pass a law criminalizing them and send police to arrest violators.
Right.
But Zegai knew from his time in the Derg that top-down coercion often just drives these practices underground. So, true to his new philosophy, he approached it from the roots. He engaged the elder women of the communities.
The ones who upheld the traditions.
Exactly. The very people who were often the traditional custodians of these practices. He facilitated slow, respectful dialogues. He anchored his arguments against these practices in traditional Oromo values of bodily integrity and the absolute requirement for consent. He helped the culture change itself from within, which is infinitely more durable than a government mandate.
He's a reformer to his core, but lest anyone think he just mellowed out and became a completely faith, apolitical NGO director in his old age, his radical edge never really disappeared. The sources note that while running Hundi, he was actually arrested again by the government in the early 2000s.
Yeah, he couldn't help himself.
And what was his crime this time? Teaching a workshop on human rights to a group of women. It just proves he never stopped poking the bear.
He remained committed to the truth, regardless of which regime was in power.
But looking at his two eras, the minister and the NGO founder, I have to ask a challenging question. Is this grassroots approach, giving out cows, planting trees, facilitating local dialogues, is it actually more effective than his time as a minister where he literally redistributed millions of hectares of land overnight?
That's a tough one.
Or is focusing on microfinance just a safer, quieter way for an aging radical to operate in a fractured, dangerous political landscape?
It's a profound question of scale versus sustainability. I would argue it's not simply about seeking safety. It's about his deep realization of what actually endures. The sweeping edicts of 1975 instantly changed the map of Ethiopia, yes.
Yep.
But they also unleashed massive chaos, violence, and ultimately required a brutal military apparatus to enforce. A decree can be rewritten by the next dictator. The work of Hundi is infinitely slower. It is quieter. But it builds resilience directly into the very fabric of the community.
Right.
When you teach a village how to manage its own microfinance cooperative, when you empower a woman with joint land rights, you create a foundation that can survive the shifting winds of national politics. It is the work of planting deep roots, rather than chopping down the entire forest to build a new one.
And there is a beautiful, highly emotional detail in the source material that perfectly symbolizes this journey back to the roots. We talked earlier about how Zegai arrived in Addis Ababa as a young boy with a heavy Oromo accent, how he was brutally bullied for it, and how he retreated into silence. He eventually mastered Amharic and European languages to survive in the elite spheres. Well, the text notes that in the 1990s, when he started Hundi and surrounded himself with local Oromo colleagues to do this grassroots work, he realized he had lost his mother tongue.
Wow.
He actually had to ask his younger staff members to teach him the vocabulary. He had to relearn how to speak Afan Oromo fluently.
It is the ultimate, poignant return to his origins. Consider the arc of his life. He spent decades navigating the highest, most dangerous echelons of imperial courts, drafting laws in secret rooms, debating Marxist juntas, surviving a decade in a political black site.
Yeah.
And after all of that, he returns to the language of his childhood, to the soil of his ancestors, working face-to-face with the very people he set out to protect when he was a law student.
It is a stunning completion of a life circle. So as we synthesize the totality of Zegai Asfa's journey, we are looking at a man who was handed the absolute keys to the kingdom. He had the legal pen that could reshape a nation, and he used that power to give the kingdom away to its poorest citizens.
Exactly.
He suffered a decade of psychological torture and the loss of his family life as payment for his convictions. And his response to that immense suffering was not bitterness. He dedicated his twilight years to passing out cows, fighting for women's rights, and helping local farmers plant trees.
For those listening today, the resonance of his story is profound. We live in an era where it is incredibly easy to feel paralyzed by the scale of massive systemic issues, whether it's global inequality, political polarization, or environmental collapse.
Definitely.
Zegai's life offers a powerful dual lesson. On one hand, it proves that you can push for massive institutional change. The rigid rules of society can be rewritten if you are brave enough to challenge them. But it equally proves that when those macro systems fail, or when the political landscape becomes too corrupt or dangerous to navigate, you are not powerless.
Right.
You can still make a profound multi-generational impact by simply helping one community plant a nursery. Power exists at both the top of the state and at the root of the tree.
Exactly. You don't have to choose between being a radical revolutionary and a quiet community organizer. Sometimes a single life demands that you be both. Which leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over. We spent a lot of time discussing the semantic dangers Zegai faced when he fought the Derg to change the legal language of the land reform from government ownership to public ownership. It was a tiny distinction, just one word in a massive legal document. But he knew it was the difference between tyranny and freedom, and it almost cost him his life in a dark cell.
Because that one word dictates who ultimately holds the leverage in a society.
Right. Now, step out of 1970s Ethiopia and look around us today. Look at the digital platforms we use to communicate, the massive troves of data we generate every time we open our phones, the technological infrastructure we completely rely on to live our modern lives. Who really owns the ground we stand on now?
That is the question.
Is it the government? Is it a handful of massive tech corporations? Or is it the public?
It might be the defining structural question of our current era.
And what would our modern version of land to the tiller actually look like? If the blueprint of our society is indeed drawn